Our speaker tonight truly knows what she's talking about. She is able to harvest more than 100 fruit varieties year-round from her residential suburban lot, from heirloom and rare varieties of apples and oranges to exotics and tropicals like pineapple guavas, passion fruit, palm berries, avocados, and bananas, as well as pears, peaches, figs, pomegranates, blackberries, mulberries, jujubes, and service berries. Lisa, our speaker, credits her father with starting her down this slippery slope. In her own words, she said, "When I was 5, my dad asked me where food came from. I said, from the A&P, which in the South is like Safeway out here. My dad dug up a 10 by 6-foot plot in our Huntsville, Alabama yard. He told my mother he was doing it because he would not raise a child who didn't understand where food came from." That began Lisa's lifelong love of learning about almost anything, which has earned her 5 university degrees so far. Some years ago, her son introduced Lisa to his 2nd grade teacher, saying, "Ms. Navarro, this is my mom. She goes to college now, even though she doesn't have to." Lisa has written for at least 6 publications, heavy on the fruit-centric, and is current chair of the Santa Clara Valley chapter of the California Rare Fruit Growers. She discovered and named a very early-bearing mulberry tree called Early Bird, which was first offered through One Green World and now by Rain Tree and several other nurseries. And if you're wondering what's next for Lisa, she's taking several grad classes in doing research with drones and satellites and is a member of the San Jose State University Drone Club. I'm pleased to announce that Lisa is this year's TD Talk speaker. Richard and Bracy TD were strong supporters of Western Hort and the Santa Clara Valley Master Gardeners, both during their lives and through substantial bequests in their wills. As an avid gardener and someone who willingly shares what she has learned, Lisa exemplifies the spirit of volunteering that Richard and Bracy embraced. Our talk tonight is called Food Forests in Suburbia: How to Create a Microfarm and Still Have a Life. Please join with me in welcoming Lisa Stapleton. That was very nice.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. Well, when Nancy first asked me if I would be interested in speaking, I was a little intimidated, and I remember talking to my husband going, I don't know what I can tell these people because, you know, some of them have academic backgrounds. They're just a really bright group of people. I'm not sure what I can say that will be new and interesting to them. And my husband said, well, whenever you give these tours, people walk away scratching their heads going, you know, I could probably plant more things in my yard. So why don't you just talk about how you plant so many things in your yard? And I thought that's probably a good thing for this audience, because if you're like me, there's always just one more plant. It's kind of like that theme song that the princes sing in Into the Woods. You know, there's always one more castle. There's always one more princess, one more dragon. Well, in our world, there's always one more plant. And so the problem is, you know, how do you fit everything in? So let's start with what I'll share today. I'd like to start out by talking about dense pack, why we do it, what it is. I'm going to try to give you some examples, and then I'm going to try to talk you into looking at your own spaces a little bit more carefully and a little more broadly. I'm going to talk in particular, since most of us have parking strips on our lots, I'm going to talk a little bit about parking strip gardening and some special considerations, things you could fit in fairly easily there. I'd like to talk a little bit, this is in the having a life part of the talk. I'd like to talk about how you can make gardening easier on yourself, not just physically, but also kind of the mental sustaining the mental force that you kind of need when you're a gardener and you're on basically long-term projects of growing this tree or this bush. And then I'd like to talk about some uncommon fruits that you might not have thought about that work well with dense pack. I brought some various things to sample, particularly right now I had a few pineapple guavas left and I had a few pawpaws left, and I'm going to talk about those, and probably some people in this group haven't tasted them, so feel free to take some in the back when you go. And then when I turned this talk in, Nancy said that, everybody had really loved a picture that I took of some of my bananas. And she said, we really want to talk about we want to hear about how you grow bananas. So I'm going to give you sort of like a little bonus thing. I don't think they're easy, but they are possible now, and some of you might want to try it. And then I'm going to finish up by talking a little bit about year-round fruit growing and what's possible in this area. First, let's start out with the typical Silicon Valley dilemma. You can eat fresh fruit every day here. Out of your yard, you can grow some varieties of most fruit. Luckily, we are at the southern end of the range of northern growing plants, and the northern end of a lot of the subtropicals. So there's a lot of stuff that will do okay here. You might have to pick low chill varieties or cold tolerant varieties, but you can do it. And you can grow enough to get something from your garden every day. And I'm going to show you some examples of what I harvest. You can even extend that season by clever choices of variety, and also by picking varieties that are known to be either good keepers or keep well in storage or dry well, somehow preserve it. And here's a little bit of proof here. This is basically a graph of when I harvest different things. I pretty much year-round on oranges. Avocados are much of the year. Day-neutral strawberries much of the year. So I've always got a little bit of something going on. But the average single-family home lot size in San Jose is 6,872 feet, according to some Federal Reserve economist who studies this kind of thing. So you start out with 6,900 square feet, roughly. When you use 3,000 feet for the house, the sidewalk, the driveway, you're left, and subtract a little bit of room for things like paths, and you need a little bit of grass to walk around in between the trees, right? Then you end up with about half that. You end up with about 3,400 square feet. This is our house, and you can see that unlike the ones on either side of it, it's pretty green. And so, you spend all this money for a house, and then you really only get about half of it for growing space. So what are you gonna do? Uh-oh, technical difficulty here. The clicker seems to have stopped. Thank you. So what is dense pack anyway? Dense pack is the answer. And I took a photo from, I think that's around 2022, of part of our front yard. And this is a really good example of a lot of the principles of dense pack here. It's growing multiple crops or varieties of plants in a very small space. It's related to the idea of food forests, because typically what you're going to do is you're going to have some really tall trees, you're going to have some intermediate trees, you're probably going to have some low-growing shrubs, and maybe some ground cover. You're basically trying to use every bit of light, every bit of sun, and every bit of dirt that you've got. Interestingly, you don't need to have the sun and the dirt in the same place necessarily, right? And so that's one of the tricks that we're going to talk about is an intelligent use of vertical space, particularly using vines or growing trees extra tall. So for example, you can see that upper layer there, those are bananas in pots. And that uses the space that we have on a balcony, not all of it, but some of it, to actually grow something. Then you see on either side of the driveway, on the left side of the driveway, here, this is primarily pomegranates and blackberries. And a little further up here, there's actually an orange and there's some service berries down right about here. Up here, we have a vining plant. This is a passion fruit. And I brought an example. They're about this big, they're purple, about the same color as my dress. They're wonderful over anything like cream or ice cream. Oh, just really wonderful tropical taste. They actually were used to flavor Hawaiian punch when Hawaiian punch first came out. Now they've got some sort of artificial chemical. It's not really passion fruit anymore. But back then it was really passion fruit when I was little. Let's see, so can I advance it? Okay, so here are some of the principles of dense pack. You can double or triple trunk, and that's like planting 2 or 3 trees within about a foot, foot and a half between the trunks. You can graft, so you get several things on the same tree. One of our members has a really famous tree in our Santa Clara Valley Kerfig where he's got like over 80 different kinds of citrus on one huge tree. It is just the most amazing thing. You can match the plants to each other's needs and to the space. So for example, we've got on the right, we've got pineapple guava. Well, pineapple guava can take a little bit of shade. So the fact that there are some taller plants that might shade it a little, it's going to be okay. And then you can reevaluate what constitutes growing space. This trellis up here with the passion fruit, I mean, that was just a wall over our garage until I planted something over on this side right here and trained it to grow up some iron trellising that we hung up on this kind of white wooden piece of wood here. And my husband helped me nail it in, grumbling a little, but he did help. And now it probably produces about 100 of them. Surprisingly, this idea of dense pack is still a little controversial. We have an expert who sometimes talks to us about avocados in our chapter. And he said maybe 5 years ago that he didn't think that it was a good idea to plant 2 avocados really close together because his idea was that one would kind of dwarf the other. Well, that might be true if you weren't the gardener, but you're going to end up being like a sun cop. And you're going to prune these things so that everybody gets what they need. The other reason it's kind of controversial is we're used to a certain style of lawn. Grass, 1 or 2 trees, maybe a hedge. And that is a style that was made popular by the great lords of the great houses of England. And the reason why they put huge brass moats around their castles was in part to say to everybody else, we have all this land to waste. This doesn't grow anything. It's just for us to, run our fox hunts and polo, play polo on. So that is not a style that is adaptable to Silicon Valley where land is so dear. Okay. Now, just because it's a farm doesn't mean it can't be pretty. These are some roses that I have a fig in the middle. It's a circle of roses and I have a fig and you can see, it's a beautiful cascade of flowers all the way around it. That is, I believe that's sharp velvet pomegranate. It's as beautiful as a flower in my opinion. It's gorgeous. So my message is, we don't have a lot of land here, but it can be enough. On the left here, we have a harvest that I took in March 2020. Remember what happened in March 2020? We were all immediately locked down. I couldn't get a Safeway or Amazon online order in for about 6 weeks, even though I was already a customer. And everybody was scared, how are we going to get our food? How are we going to, especially fresh produce, right? So I took this picture to sort of pass around amongst my friends and on social media to say, look, there's hope and you can have some independence. Obviously, if we had to live just on my little garden, we might be able to do it, but we would be really, really thin. I'm very glad that there's Safeway and Amazon and all of that. But it makes you feel like I've got some control and I can do these things not just for me, but for my community. I was able to share with some of my daughter's friends, with some of our neighbors, and it made me feel like I could do something for my community that was really important at a hard moment. The one on the right I just took recently, you can see I've got time of year, it's pomegranates, it's passion fruit, it's pawpaws, it's oranges. You can see I've got about a half full carafe of pomegranate juice that I squeezed myself. No sugar added. It tastes wonderful. It's just a miracle. So how caring for dense pack is a little different. There are two main ways that it's different. You're going to have to prune more carefully and aggressively, always sort of keeping in mind, where is the sun? How much does this plant need? Can it get what it needs, with considering the plants around it? Sun cop idea or sun parent, or you've got a bunch of kids and they've got to share the candy bar. Everybody needs to get something. And you fertilize a little more. Now, I tend to use mostly organic fertilizer, but I sometimes use, for the sake of time, I use time-released fertilizer because you can sort of put it down there and then forget about it for a little while. And for most of this time, I've had a job, I've had children, I've got a husband, I've taken all these courses. Time is really a precious commodity. You need to be careful. The one thing I want to caution everybody is try not to use too much phosphorus in your fertilizing, even for things like bananas that are heavy feeders. You don't want to hit them with too much phosphorus at the same time. You'll burn them. So always sort of, one thing that I do is I use half as much twice as often, because that avoids sort of the shock of way too much phosphorus. It gives it the same amount of fertilizer though. And just parenthetically, steer is better than chicken this way. It's less likely to burn your plants. Warning. This can become very addictive because you're like the addict, just one more plant, just one more plant. Strange things will creep into your yard. Odd looking apples will appear in your rose garden. Roses will appear in your apple garden. Someday, the plants might breach your defenses and come up over your roofs and your gates, or make a grab at your utility area, or you. I survived the attack by the banana plant there. So let's talk about some examples, and I want to get you all kind of involved in thinking about your own spaces and where you could apply some of these ideas. So let's go back to this one. Some of the things that we talked about the passiflora. I'm giving you sort of a close-up to give you a little more of a deep dive of that area. This is on the left of the driveway, but it was kind of out of view, hidden by the pomegranates. And you can see we've got a number of different plants coexisting perfectly happily. Here, this is a pomegranate here, and you can see it's got some fruit on it still. This is ripening mandarin oranges. Over here next to the pomegranates, I've also got some thornless blackberries. Thornless is important because this is right near a pathway, and so you don't want people getting torn up. Here is the passion fruit. And I'm just giving you sort of a close-up of what they look like. And, you know, the flowers are beautiful and amazing and almost look a little alien. When the story goes that when the Padres came out here and saw something called a maypop, which is very similar to that picture, that they gave it the name passion fruit, not because they were thinking of love and passion. They were thinking of the passion of the Christ. And to them, um, these little things sticking up reminded them of like the hand of Christ, you know, and the nails and the palm. And somebody told me this story when I was a kid, and it was horrifying, but it was kind of an interesting piece of lore. This is my biggest one. This is one over the driveway. It's Frederick, amazing plant. I probably get over 100 of these a year off of this this trellis. So, you know, we definitely double trunked here, particularly on the right-hand side. There are a bunch of several oranges that are just planted with their trunks about a foot apart, but they've grown together almost like a hedge, right? We build abundance through diversity. We've matched the plants to the space and to each other. And we've considered ourselves sort of as an ecological part of this. And by that, I mean, I can't believe it sounds so crunchy when I actually say it out loud, but what I mean by that is that you are sort of the driving force of your garden. And if things are too hard for you, probably you're going to be like me and you're going to put them off. The great thing about having all of this stuff right by the driveway is it's right there. You come in, you park, you're on your way in, you see what's there. Maybe you grab something. One time I was sitting in my driveway when my son, who was about 15 years old, came up on his skateboard, and our entry pad for the garage, the keypad is right about there. And he reached for the pad, but then he grabbed 2 or 3 oranges on his way in. He didn't see me there. And I thought, yes, yes, I am a success as a gardener and a mother. You know, my son is just, you know, using these rather than junk food. This is wonderful. So having it where you can get to it, where you can tend to it, that's an important part of any dense pack design. And then, you know, think about some of the unusual growing spaces here, the trellis, the bananas up top. Those are all kind of unusual spaces that normally would not be used. So here's a little bit more on vines. It's growing up. This is taken from the balcony, the one on the right. You're looking down, it's coming up. And I eventually plan to train it into the balcony area. You can see it's creeping there on the left. It's creeping on there. And you see this wall right here, right there. It's coming in right about there. It's hidden by the umbrella in this view. And then I plan to grow it all the way across to here. And so then it'll be even easier to harvest those fruits on the inside, right? Because it'll be right there on the balcony. Here's an example of the food forest idea. This is kind of in the front of the driveway on the left. And you saw the pomegranate already. And these little orange blossoms are sort of the pomegranate blossoms draping down over the service berries. My daughter just loves these. They're actually native, mostly to like Canada, down through British Columbia, down through Washington and Oregon. We're the southern part of the range. But these are like blueberries, but they're less fussy about the soil. Everybody I know who grows blueberries has to grow them in peat moss. They have to add aluminum sulfate. You don't have to do that stuff with this. You just plant it in your dirt and it grows. And it does have the advantage that it's a native, so it's kind of evolved to grow in a lot of different environments. Sort of, it starts out as an understory shrub, And then as it gets a little bit bigger, some of them achieve tree size, some of them stay kind of low and bushy. So there's different varieties have different characteristics. Here's another example of using vertical space. It's multi-level gardening. What you're looking at is this is the railing on one of the east facing balconies. And you're looking at an avocado. You've got some pomegranates here, these yellow ones. There's an apple that's coming up right about here. And over on the corner, there's another pomegranate. And all of these started out, low to the ground and everything, but we grew them up there, and there wasn't much sun where the dirt was, but if you could get it up to this level, it gets sun more than half of the day. And there are some varieties here, particularly avocados, service berries. They do well in the earliest and pawpaws. They will handle shade when they're young. And so the trick is you plant them in places that are kind of shady, they'll grow bigger, and then if they can get to sun later on in their lives, they'll be good bearers. So ask yourself, where's your unused space? Where could you add something that you want? So we've already talked about the faces of walls and trellises. Parking strips are a big unused area for a lot of people. A lot of times you can slip an extra plant in right next to something that you've already got. You can graft onto other trees. You can use arches over vines and driveways. I've sort of toyed with the idea of maybe putting some iron trellises over our driveway at some point and training the plants to grow over it. Because remember how I had to subtract about 500 feet for things like the driveway? That way you get that space back, right? That would be growing space and it would look pretty. My husband is looking skeptical. We'll talk later, hon. So for example, here are some pineapple guavas mixed in with some oranges. So you can train the pineapple guavas to be kind of bushy and shrubby. And then you can have these big oranges kind of coming up out of that kind of bushy growth, and it looks pretty. And I think I've got about 150 oranges on that orange tree, and I harvested a whole bunch of pineapple guavas, some of which are back there, from the pineapple guava. It worked out really well. So a couple of things that you might not think about when you go to do a parking strip garden. You're probably going to want to put the tall trees and the wide bushes sort of at the ends of your parking strip, because you're going to want it to be so that like when the car door opens on the right there, that like it can swing wide and not like run into your plant or scratch your car door, right? You can use edible ground covers. Here are some examples. I've got a lot of New Zealand spinach, which turns into a wonderful ground cover and can be used as spinach in the summer months when you can't grow spinach here. Day neutral strawberries are a wonderful ground cover. The one problem is we are on the path for a school, and I only get maybe half of them because the little kids come by and they go, "Oh, there's a strawberry there." And they're not thinking they're stealing or anything. They're just like, "Oh, there's a strawberry there." So, sometimes you got to protect them a little. Thornless blackberries and raspberries can be grown. They only get about that big if you trim them. Violets for very shady spots. Violets are edible. Very lovely smell to them too. Low growing service berries, melons, cukes, pumpkins, squash. One time in our neighborhood, I discovered that I had become known as the pumpkin lady, because the day after Christmas, when everybody was playing with their toys, there was a kid who had gotten a sheriff's badge and a little toy gun holster. And he was about 4 years old. His older brothers and sisters were playing out front too. And I'm walking along and he says, Halt! Are you a bad guy? And one of the older kids said, no, silly, that's the pumpkin lady. Don't you recognize her? And I thought, I'm the pumpkin lady? I thought, well, it's not a bad thing to be known as. You can even intermix ornamentals. I have thornless roses that I've planted there, thornless so that, people don't get scraped when they're coming and going from their cars. And you should try to figure out where is the right place to put a cut across so that people can get from their cars to the sidewalk. Okay, this is in the category make it easier on yourself. Consider your time and physical comfort. We talked a little bit about this before. Paths that you can walk on are really important. Even though I don't like using a space for them, you got to be able to get to where you need to go to harvest and weed and prune. Don't try to scrimp on cheap tools. It's almost always a sucker's bet. Get the toughest, meanest looking tools you can find. I always get these. I always tease my husband. I bring home these things that are like loppers. It'll take a 2.5-inch branch. And he's like, "Whoa!" And I said, "Well, I'm getting the one the men want. It's the more power thing, more power. Buy tough resistant, disease resistant plants. I look for stuff that says that it's extra disease resistant. That's really important. Save you time later. You keep fruit where you can reach it, at least with a good telescoping pruner. And we have somebody that speaks to us fairly frequently named Ed Livo, and he used to work for Dave Wilson nurseries, and he says you should never have a fruit tree that grows any higher than this, whatever this is for you. Well, I think that's maybe a little extreme. I'll use a pole pruner, but I definitely am now starting to take a lot of my trees down in height so that when I'm old, I don't have to get on a ladder. That doesn't sound very healthy. The working women's rule, things that preserve well or preserve on the tree are, at the top of my list. Weed barriers are your friend. If you can never let a weed go to seed, then you will save yourself so much time. And I try to do a little something every day. Pick something, plant something, weed something, do something. Because as the kids say, it's important to touch grass, the way they put it. And I also try to think in terms of square foot gardening. There's a fellow who used to give talks on PBS all the time. And Mel Bartholomew would say, think in terms of little 1-foot patches. Well, for me, it's really more like 3-foot patches. But think about, I'm going to weed 6 square feet or 9 square feet today. And that is such a more doable, faceable task than thinking I'm going to have to go weed the whole yard today. Just think I'm going to do this many square feet. And sometimes you'll decide you're on a roll and you'll keep going, but then other times you'll go, nope, I accomplished the goal. Now I'm going on to whatever else is going on in my life. An example where the things we do for love conflicted with the amount of time and energy I had. Hubby loves cherimoyas. They require hand pollination here. And normally my philosophy is if that plant can't have sex and produce offspring without me involved in the actual act, then I'm not interested. But hubby really loves cherimoyas. And he asked me very nicely if I could maybe grow a few cherimoyas for him. And of course, what am I going to say to the love of my life, my husband of years? I won't. But how to even reach the flowers or pollinate them. So here's my solution. It's growing on the first floor. It's a little bit shaded there, but it gets enough sun so that I'm able to trellis it. I've got some first floor trellises, and I've trained one shoot to grow straight up. This is the second floor balcony here. And I intend to have it grow all the way across the second floor balcony as well. So whether I'm on the first floor or the second floor, I can just take the paintbrush and just do it in a day or two. You know, I can pollinate the thing that way, and we can get cherimoyas. And we actually did get 2 last year, but a squirrel got one of them, so I only ended up with one. So I'm hoping that, you know, as this thing gets bigger, we'll get more. I'm working on it, honey. So we're trellising things, you know, trellising to where we can reach. That's a principle. This is another cherimoya in the front yard, and I'm doing the same thing there. It's kind of taken from up above it, and you can see right around in here, it actually has a few little tiny flowers on it, but it's still too far from where I can get to it yet. But I think probably next year it'll be fine. So here are a few unusual, easy plants to grow here. Pineapple guavas, we got some back there. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. Mulberries and thornless blackberries. You can have berries really pretty much from March around here till around December. My husband worked with a guy who once said that he would never marry a woman who was smarter than he was, or as smart as he was, because he wanted to be the smart one in the family. And I was packing lunches for Lauren, and in December I packed him some day neutral strawberries. And this same friend said, "Those look like fresh strawberries. They're so out of season. How did you get them?" And my husband said, and I am so proud of him, he said, "You know, that's what happens when you marry a smart woman. You get fresh strawberries in your lunch in December." So proud of him. We have some pawpaws in the back that are available for you to taste. I figured most people have not tasted a fresh pawpaws, so they're the ones in the little cup. Service berries, we've already talked a little bit about those. Jujubes are an Asian fruit, and you just stick that tree in the ground and it grows. I'll also show you some pictures of a pindo palm or jelly palm, which is a nice, pretty palm tree that also has the benefit of little orange berries, maybe ranging from the size of a big cherry up to maybe like a ping pong ball size. So here are the pineapple guavas. These are what they look like when they're fruiting on the right. And then there's a little bush there. We have a number of, used to be you could only get Nazamets and Coolidge. And now there are starting to be a lot more choices. I've got Robert is good. I've got that one. Trask is great. I've got that one. It's got fairly big fruit. Mammoth has big fruit. And there are even some New Zealand hybrids where it's got a really thin skin and you can actually even eat the skin. And you could eat the skin on these, but it's just kind of a little tough and not real pleasant. They tolerate partial shade or partial sun, and the flowers are even edible. They're kind of little pink flowers, and you can clip them off and use them to accent your salads. Mulberries are very productive, and other than pruning, they are trouble-free. Lots of delicious varieties. This is a Pakistan. Those berries are 3.5 to 4 inches long. They are huge. Very unique honey taste on this one. Trouble-free except for squirrels and birds. And usually on this one, there's so much fruit that I don't even worry about what the squirrels and the birds get. Very strong growers. They use the males are used in a lot of corporate street tree plantings because they don't have fruit. And the females are the ones that we're interested in, and they grow just as well. So I'm just listing some different varieties. So when you go back and look at the slides, you can see, you know, what would be a good choice for me. Giraldi and dwarf everbearing are the only ones that are kind of small naturally. Everything else can get quite big, but you can keep them small with pruning. Early bird is the one that we mentioned that I discovered. I didn't breed it. I found it as a seedling. And I noticed that it was the first berry in my yard to produce, sometimes even in March. And so I thought, this is special. And when somebody asked me, did I have anything special that wasn't, something that was patented or something, I said, yeah, I've got this one. You could popularize it. And he did. Thornless blackberries and raspberries make wonderful vines and shrubs. And I love it because in our small spaces that we've got to work with, it's such a bummer when you've got a thorny plant there and you bend over and it literally nips you in the butt, And so that this is a way to avoid that. There's been a lot of breeding in recent years. There's the Primark series, Primark Traveler, Primark Freedom, wonderful breeding line of different kinds of blackberries without thorns. Used to have just a few. There was Black Satin, Triple Crown, and Darrow. Now we've even got some thornless or nearly thornless raspberries like Caroline and Tahi. Quick to bear, really fast growing. If they say they're good for zone 9, then it's probably going to work out okay. They'll tolerate the heat here. And sometimes they double crop. I've got a Primark Freedom blackberry that has a few blackberries on it now, but its main flush was like back in June or July. So, and literally, if they can become so carefree that if you let them escape, they'll naturalize like bulbs or something. This is a pawpaw. It's native to the eastern half of the United States, from Florida all the way up to Michigan. It's about as far north as I've heard of people growing them. And they think that it used to be, it's related to cherimoyas. They think that they had a common ancestor, and this is the branch that learned to handle cold. And they never made it over the Rockies, but you can mail order. So your pawpaws can make it over the Rockies. I put them in here because they are practically pest-free, other than occasionally squirrels try to gnaw them. Do well in shade when they're young. You get them up tall, they get more sun, then they bear. And that's very similar to the way they do in the wild. Very custardy consistency. You can make pudding out of them just by, they're kind of like a really ripe persimmon that way. They have about that consistency. And we put them over ice cream. The reason you don't see them in the stores is they don't transport well and they don't keep well. So there's something that the industry, that's poison to the industry. So you're never going to get that from agribusiness. Showing a picture here of the pawpaw, which is turning kind of golden up top. Below, there's a tomato and there are a whole bunch of citrus. And when it's not fall, the pawpaw blends in with the citrus. It just looks like kind of like a green wall. They kind of look like they're the same plant. But in the fall, you get the fall color of the pawpaws, and they seem to coexist really well together. Jujubes, these are not our jujubes, these are my neighbors, but his have pretty much, as far as I can tell, naturalized. Started out with one tree, now he's got like 5 or 6 along the back of his fence. I don't even know if he knows, he's not the original owner, so I don't even know if he knows what they are. You get that a lot, where plants are abandoned and they're unusual and people don't know what they are. I love them as a working woman because they will actually dry on the tree, or they'll fall off and dry on the ground. And so, you have a long time that you can harvest these things. Okay, by popular demand, here are my bananas. California Gold was the first one that I fruited. It's this one on the right. Used to be really difficult, almost impossible to grow a banana around here, but more and more of the Kerfig members are finding themselves able to do it. I know a guy named Bill Merrill who has them growing out in his front yard in Fremont in the East Bay, which is much colder than San Jose. So I was like, oh, if he could do that, maybe I could do it. And he had huge cans of bananas in the rafters of his garage when I visited him in March. And his bananas, he said he was thinning his bananas, and I pictured almost like thinning little tiny plants. But he came out with a chainsaw and cut a corm off of this banana mat. Bananas kind of spread out in mats, and they're kind of this starchy, kind of woody kind of tuber. And I'm like, whoa, this is great. So unfortunately, climate change helped in this area. Whenever my tropical plants do well, I'm torn because part of me goes, good for me, but the other part goes, sucks for the planet. You know, we really are changing our climate. Now I get bananas about every third year. Um, they do need some protection when they're young. I use rime or agricultural cloth, and I sometimes use Christmas tree lights, not the LEDs that we use now. But if you can get your hands on some old Christmas tree lights, the kind that used to, singe the fingers of millions of baby boomers every year, those will give you just enough protection if you grow cold tolerant varieties for you to harvest them. So keep them warm. I also use a trick where I fill up black trash cans with water, and I put a little Clorox in so we don't get mosquitoes, and I cover it with the lid. And when it gets cold at night, these things radiate the heat that they absorbed during the day. And if it were to try to freeze, if the weather were freezing water liberates a lot of heat. And it's enough to kind of protect the banana from sustaining serious damage. Typically, we have such heavy clay soils, wood chips or peat are really helpful because that's the main thing you don't want is root rot. And in particular, bananas don't like being cold and having lots of water in their roots. It will cause them to rot. You almost can't feed or water a growing banana enough, but you can kill a banana in the winter by watering it or feeding it too much. California Gold is a really good variety, cold tolerant. Sweetheart is the result of a breeding program. That's the FIHIA03. I put that there because some people still sell it by that number rather than by the name. Blue Java or ice cream is a really good variety, and it's very tough. Goldfinger is another one from this breeding variety to make things more wind and cold tolerant. I've known some people who have fruited Rajapuri and something called dwarf Namois or Orinoco. These are the only ones I've ever heard of anybody in this area being able to fruit. This is a blue Java. You can tell that some of the fruit have kind of a blue-green look to them. So that's the name. Around Groundhog's Day, I start hitting it with, I usually use Osmocote, which is a time-released fertilizer. And then again around Memorial Day. And those two applications are usually enough to force it to throw up a flower. You know that one that I showed you where it looked like I was being mauled by the banana plant? That was one of the flowers. So I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, but you can really stretch out your harvest using a few tricks. There are really only two times that it's really difficult. The summer takes care of itself. So early spring and late winter are a really hard time to have things that fruit. So I try Primark in Colombia, blackberries will start bearing early. Some of the mulberries will start early. Day neutral strawberries may start as early as March. You get lemons and limes throughout the early spring, and some keep well on the tree. And I've noticed that in this area, a lot of oranges, once they get mature, they'll actually bear year round or nearly year round. They have a heavy season and a light season rather than just one season. Navel oranges. There's something called late lane, which is early, and which is very late, and then Valencia, which will take you through the summer. Now is the other period where you have to kind of be a little clever. It's persimmons, it's pineapple guavas, some of the very first citrus to really bear in the fall is just starting now. Avocados, you'll start to get some of them around December, November. And starting in January, you'll start to have things like Zitano, which isn't that great of an avocado. It's an okay avocado. But if you, as an avocado expert I know said, if you want an avocado in February, that's what you got to have. Zitano's your boy. Ways to extend your harvest. Plant early and late varieties of the same fruit. So an early apricot and a late apricot. I've got a great multi-grafted tree. First one starts like about a month to 5 weeks before the second one. So I end up having about 6 weeks of apricots. Apples, you can have apples from June to right about now. And if you plant good keepers, you might have them in March, as late as March. So also pears and apples keep very well. I've ordered some plastic trays like the grocers use to display things. And I put those in the refrigerator, and they've each got a slot for an apple or a pear. And you can keep eating them for about 2 or 3 months after you've picked them. Persimmons, the same thing. The Asian persimmons, you can pick them when they're hard and eat them like an apple, and then you can eat them like a pudding in January. And I've already mentioned the jujubes dry on the tree. These are just some little tricks that I noticed about growing different kinds of fruit. I mentioned the Epsom salts because a lot of us have magnesium poor soils. And I thought it was maybe an old wives' tale, but I heard that if you put Epsom salts into your watering system, that it'll sweeten up the oranges in a few days. And I thought maybe it was an old wives' tale, but some of those old wives really knew what they were doing because it really does sweeten them up. And so you can harvest them maybe a little earlier than you otherwise would. And so that's it. I'm open for questions. I know we covered a lot of things, but I hope that I've made you see your spaces a little differently and have given you some ideas of what some of the options are, some of the things that have worked for me in San Jose. And I'm hoping you'll be able to take these principles forward and grow food for yourselves, your family, and even your community, because it really is a wonderful feeling when you feel like you've achieved a little bit of self-sufficiency and a little bit of help in your community for people who, with supply chains being the way they are these days, are food insecure. Thank you.